There are a lot of people in this world that I look up to, love spending time with, and have a real thing for, but there are kind of a couple classifications of people that if you find them and you put me around them, I'm sort of like a dog with their tongue hanging out. One of them is professional cyclists, and the other is Navy SEALs. And a number of years ago, many of you who were here may remember when Tyler Hamilton came to speak after he'd just written his book called The Dirty Race. And it was all about Tyler being the first of the Lance Armstrong team that broke the code of silence to bring down the US Postal team and get Lance to admit that he had doped. And Tyler came and spoke, and it was one of the most raw presentations we've ever had in Sun Valley. Took him a while to get going, but once he got going, man, oh man, was it an incredible presentation. But he sat there and talked about the fact that he got put between a rock and a hard place by the Justice Department. Someone stood up and actually called him a hero, and he said, "Ma'am, I'm not a hero. I got put between a rock and a hard place by the Justice Department, and I took the decision to tell the truth rather than go to jail. That's not being a hero. That's doing what I thought was the right thing to do for me." But right after Tyler had talked about breaking the rules and living with the lie and all the things that he dealt with, we had Nick Norris, who had run Navy SEAL training, come up. And the juxtaposition between Tyler talking about his life and all of these lies and all that, and then Nick shows up, and man, oh man, is he straight up, and this is the way we do it, and this is the way we select, and this is the way we train. It was fantastic to see that juxtaposition between the two lives that they'd lived and how Nick trained Navy SEALs. The reason that Rich is here is that when I read his book, The Attributes, what Rich has done after having been such a successful Navy SEAL commander is basically translate that in Navy SEAL training, which is called BUDS, they're not training, they're selecting. We all think about BUDS, that they bring these people in and they're starting to train them. That whole process is all about figuring out what the attributes are in those Navy SEALs to make them great Navy SEALs to be commanded by somebody like Rich. And so, Rich, it is an honor, a pleasure. I will thank you for everyone here for your service to our country, and I will turn the stage over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Willie. And it's an honor and pleasure to be here. Thank you, Willie. Thank you, Susan, the whole entire clan. My family's here, too, so we've been having a great time. I'm going to talk to you today about leading superheroes, which means I have to kind of dispel the first myth, okay? And that myth is that Navy SEALs are not superheroes. None of us consider ourselves superheroes. We are all just a bunch of regular guys who, I don't know, routinely put ourselves into extraordinary situations, I guess, all right? But there's a reason why we chose the profession we did. There's a reason why we succeeded in the profession we did, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. And I'm going to talk to you about the specifics of leading that type of team, a team of just seemingly remarkable human beings. And I want to talk to you about how to do that, all right? I'm going to start in Afghanistan, Bagram Air Base. Bagram Air Base, the prison in Afghanistan there, back then was one of the most secure on the planet, guarded by 3 levels of security, basically. You had concrete T-walls that kind of mazed their way in, then you had a big warehouse almost in the center of the base. Inside that warehouse, in the center of that, you had the cells. Just outside the air base itself was a Russian minefield that had been deliberately left live to prevent people from getting in or getting out. On the early morning hours of July 11th, at about 1:15 a.m., they did a head count, and they counted all the cells, but in particular one cell, 4 individuals, the top highest level prisoners they had at the base at the time, 4 of the top guys. All right, top guys in captivity at the time as well. When they did the head count again at 3:15, they realized the impossible had happened. Those 4 guys had escaped. Somehow they'd picked the lock, changed their clothes, because they all wore bright orange uniforms, by the way. Changed their clothes, made their way out of those lines of security, out off the base, through the minefield, somehow, and got into a van that was waiting for them. They got out, they dispersed, but they were basically given accolades by the entire Al-Qaeda industry, I guess we could call it. They got letters, each from bin Laden himself, congratulating them. They all went their separate ways. One of the guys stayed in Afghanistan and continued to frustrate Allied positions and talked and made videos about his escape and what he was going to do next and all that. A year later, I'm there with my SEAL troop, and we get word on where this guy is. And he's about 60 miles east of our position in some pretty heavy mountainous terrain. So we say, okay, we're going to get this guy. We start planning. Mountainous terrain, we're going to have to fly there in certain types of helicopters. We're going to have to get into a position of insert, patrol up with difficulty, surround. It's kind of a gnarly target. So we're all kind of, okay, this will be a tough one. About halfway into the planning process, we get new intel. He's on the move. He's headed towards our position, so he's headed basically east. All right, unfortunately, our position was kind of near the eastern border of Afghanistan, which meant now we were on a timeline. Because he gets across the border, he's gone. We shift again. Now we're looking at a vehicle interdiction. Different set of helos, different set of rules. Team has to make different plans. New intelligence coming all the time. We're getting ready to launch, and new intelligence comes in. He's stopped. He stopped about a click and a half from the base we're sitting on in the moment. Click and a half is about 1,500 meters. So now, take our stuff off the helos, huddle up, change the plan, drive to the back gate of the base, and start walking. Before I tell you how that story ended, I want to tell you how you make a team that rapidly adapts that way. On a dime, moves fast. Anything that happens can move and flex with the situation. And these secrets that I'm going to talk to you about are not only for SEAL teams. These secrets work for any team, whether it's business, sports, military. I'm going to share with you these 5 secrets on how we do that and how the SEALs do that. Secret number 1, all right? Optimal versus peak. I was training with a buddy of mine. He was a trainer, right? He trained a bunch of SEALs, and he was making me push these sleds, these weighted sleds, and he was timing me on how long it took me from the start point till I got to the end of the sled push. And I asked him, I said, what are you actually timing for? And he said, well, I'm seeing how fast you start your push, you come out of the gate, and then how long it takes you to get to the end. And basically measuring anaerobic versus aerobic capacity, right? Anaerobic, your strength, your kind of explosive push out. Aerobic, kind of how you finish out. I said, what are you finding about me? He said, well, what's interesting about you is when you start your push, you start at one pace and you keep the same pace all the way through. You're basically aerobic the whole way through. He said, when I do it, I start out like really anaerobic, like a strong push, and I slow down as I get to the end. And I said, what do you think, what do you see mostly SEALs doing? Because he trained a bunch of SEALs. He said, most of the SEALs do it like you. And it made me think. SEALs look at performance differently than everybody else. People think SEALs are the ultimate peak performers. And I won't disagree with you. When we have to be, we are. But what we have to understand is peak is an apex from which we can only come down. And oftentimes that peak, that apex, has to be planned for and prepared for, scheduled, right? The professional football player schedules and plans his entire week to peak for 3 hours on Sunday, okay? There's nothing wrong with peak. You need to peak, okay? But what SEALs are optimal performers, all right? Optimal performance means I'm going to do the very best I can in the moment, whatever the best looks like in that moment. Sometimes the best might look like peak. Flow states, everything's clicking, everything's cool. Sometimes the best might be I'm just head down, step by step, giving it all I got, and it's just inches by inches. It's all optimal performance. And this is the difference between a SEAL team and maybe some other teams, is we look at tasks and projects as if we don't know when they're going to end, which means we manage ourselves, we perform optimally. We pat ourselves on the back for when we're just grinding it out, as well as when we're peaking. But we us to modulate our energy throughout that time. Because guess what? I don't need to be peaking when I'm driving to the grocery store. I could be modulating my energy so that when I need to peak, I can peak on demand. When you start SEAL training, it's 6 months of basically hell. If you start thinking about the end of SEAL training when it starts, you're going to quit. You have to go head down, step by step. So the first thing high-performing teams do is they look at performance optimally. They manage their energy in an optimal way, and then they peak when they need to. They peak in those moments. When I was in SEAL, so during SEAL training, they have an evolution during Hell Week. Hell Week is the kind of the coup de grace, the crucible of SEAL training. It's the 5th week of training. You get the most number of quitters, right? It's 6 months long, but you do Hell Week in the 5th week. You do an evolution where you paddle your boats around all of Coronado Island. SEAL training's held out in Coronado Island in San Diego. Paddle your boats all the way around the island. It's basically all around the world. You take all night to do it. You do it Thursday night of Hell Week, so you haven't slept for basically, 5 days. They let you sleep for 2 hours the whole week. And I remember we were just getting ready to take our boats. We had gone through kind of a passageway at the southern part of the island. So we were getting ready to launch our boats out into the Pacific again and do the final push to where the SEAL compound was. All of our whole class, right? There was probably 5 or 6 boat crews. And the waves were horrendous. It was like 10-foot swells. This is, by the way, it's like 3 o'clock in the morning. Okay? Waves are horrendous. We're tired, right? And I remember looking at my boat crew, and I said, okay, guys, just take it paddle by paddle, just stroke by stroke. Just make this happen, okay? And we started our way out in Surf Zone. And it was tough. But stroke by stroke, we just went through, waited for the next break, went through, waited for the next break. We get out finally. We don't see anybody else, all right? We start paddling our way back up north to the compound, and I'm looking around. There's no other boats. I'm like, oh, my God, shit. We're late, right? We're the last ones. We finally get to where the compound is. I look at the compound. There's nothing. I just see the tents where we're supposed to, sleep once in a while. There's not even any boats. I'm like, oh, my God, they're all gone. We're, so late. I just see one truck that was following us on the land. We get back in. We paddle in. The instructor comes and meets us. He said, you guys are the only people to make it out of the surf zone and finish around the world. You guys are the winners. We're the only boat to make it through. Right? We modulated our energy. That's how we did it. We performed optimally. We performed optimally when we needed to. So optimal versus peak is the first thing. Now, when we talk about teams, we have to think about teams a little bit differently. Okay, Russell Ackoff was a behavioral psychologist, systems analyst, and he used to say, hey, if you took the best parts of every vehicle and put them all together, would you have the best vehicle in the world? So say the Jaguar has the best transmission, maybe the Porsche has the best suspension, maybe the Ferrari has the best engine. Take all those best parts and mash them together. Would you have the best vehicle in the world? He said, no, you wouldn't even have a vehicle, right? Because what he would say is that a system is never the sum of its parts. It's a product of their interaction. So it goes with teams. Teams are humans. Great teams are the product of the interaction between those humans. All the previous speakers, Greg, has said as much as true. It has to do with that interaction. So that interaction relies on some intangibles. Okay? It's not just those tangible things. To describe this a little bit better, I'll tell you a story. I was running training. A friend of mine, an author friend of mine, came to visit, and he was like, hey, how do you guys look at, trust and building these teams? What do you guys look at? And I had just been out to the basic SEAL training base and talked to a friend of mine who showed me this chart, which I really liked. He said, Rich, I think this is the way we do it. This chart tells us something pretty interesting. It tells us that performance and trust are actually separate things. Of course, we were always looking for that top right person, of course. And of course, we were always trying to deselect that bottom left person. Okay? The problem that we run into, a lot of us do when we're building teams, when we're hiring people, is we get seduced by the top left person, the high performance, low trust person. Why? Because performance is often visible. It's easy to see, easy to measure, easy to assess. You can put it on resumes. Okay? Trust is built through intangibles. I'm going to talk more about that. but some things that are not necessarily visible. Which gets us to our next secret, and really the subject of the book I wrote, Attributes over Skills. Back in 1915, the Gallipoli campaign was an attempt by the Allies during World War I to take over, basically invade Turkey and take over Constantinople. It was a big Allied invasion, which was massively underplanned and went horrifically, because when they did the invasion, they found that the Axis powers had mined all the straits, put up gun positions. They lost several ships, a couple submarines, many, many lives. It slogged on for about 4 or 5 months before they had to withdraw. So in World War II, as we hit about 1944, the Allies realized that the only way to win was to do another massive amphibious invasion. All right? But they had to learn the lessons of Gallipoli, and they said, hey, we need people who can swim ashore and look for mines, look for obstacles, and let us know where they are, and then blow paths clear. Draper Kaufman was a young Navy lieutenant who had formed an explosives school about a year before. He was tapped for the mission, create this unit. But Kaufman knew, even though he had a whole pool of people who knew explosives, he knew this job would take more than just knowing how to swim and knowing explosives. He needed guys who could swim across the beach when, gunfire was heavy, when the plan was going to change, when everything was uncertain, and all they'd be armed with was a knife and some explosives. He knew he had to find people who didn't necessarily know how to do the job, but people who could do the job. So he created the very first SEAL training, right? NCDUs back then, Naval Combat Demolition Units. Hell Week was the first week. He said, I'm just going to put these guys through the most hellacious week possible and see what happens. He conducted no exams, no performance evaluations, nothing during that week. No one was dropped unless someone voluntarily quitted or they were injured. He just wanted to see who quit and who did it. Many people quit, about 90%, right? And that week has translated all the way to today's BUDS training in SEAL Hell Week. And what I always think about is the genius of Kaufman, the unconscious genius, is that during my Hell Week, during my SEAL training, I spent hundreds of hours running around with heavy boats on my head on the beach, hundreds of hours exercising with 300-pound telephone poles and running around with those and freezing in the surf zone. I'm here to tell you I've done hundreds of combat missions overseas, and never on one did I carry a telephone pole on my shoulder or a boat on my head. All right? What they were doing to us was not training us to be Navy SEALs. They weren't teaching us the skills to be Navy SEAls. They were drawing out these innate qualities to see if we had these qualities, had what it took to do the job when things became uncertain and unknown and anxious. So this is attributes and skills. This is why I wrote the book. You have to separate these two, and what's the difference? Skills are not inherent to our nature. We're not born with the ability to throw a ball, ride a bike, drive a car. We learn those things. We are taught to do those things, okay? Skills direct our behavior in known and specific environments. Here's how and when to throw a ball. Here's how and when to ride a bike or drive a car. And as such, they're very visible and measurable. You can assess them. You can score them. You can put stats around them. What they don't tell us, though, is how we are going to behave when the environment becomes uncertain. Because it's very hard to apply a known skill to an unknown environment. This is where we lean on our attributes. Attributes are innate, okay? All of us are born with levels of patience, situational awareness, adaptability, resilience, okay? Certainly they develop over time and environment, but you can see levels of this stuff in small children. Attributes don't necessarily direct our behavior, they inform our behavior, okay? Our levels, or my son's levels of resilience and adaptability, informed the way they both showed up when they were learning the skill to ride a bike, and they were falling off a dozen times doing so. They inform the way we're going to show up. And because they're hidden in the background, they're very difficult to assess, measure, and test. They show up the most visibly and viscerally during times of challenge, uncertainty, and stress. So these are the qualities that drive behavior on many, many levels, more than just skills. And this is how we have to understand, these are the qualities that drive top teams. Greg talked about it. It's not about the skills, it's about the character. And these elemental things, these attributes. I'm really about kind of what I call elemental behavior. Who are we at our most raw? That's what I'm interested in. These attributes start to define who we are at our most raw. All right? Now, here's the good news. We all have all of the attributes, okay? The difference in each one of us are the levels to which we have each. Okay, so for example, I might be on adaptability if 10 is high, 1 is low. I might be a level 8, which means when the environment changes around me outside my control, I can go with the flow. I can deal with speakers that don't work or PowerPoint slides that don't show up. It's easy for me. Someone else might be a level 3, which means they're still adaptable. It's just difficult for them to do it. Right? So all of us show up with different levels. There's no judgment in how we show up. It's like judging our hair color. It's useless. And we can develop attributes. We just can't do them the same way we do skills. All right? If Willie asked me, he said, Rich, I want to learn how to shoot a pistol and hit a target, hit a bullseye every time. I could take him to the range and teach him how to do that in about 2 hours, right? That's a skill. If Willie said, hey, Rich, I want to learn how to be more patient or more adaptable, I can't teach him that. To develop an attribute takes self-motivation, self-direction, and a willingness for that individual to step into environments that tease and test that attribute. Environments of discomfort and uncertainty and stress, right? If you want to develop your patience, you're going to have to place yourself into environments that test your patience. So I don't know, drive in traffic or something like that. Have kids, it's a good one. All right. In the book I put the attributes in 5 categories. Here are 4 of them, just to go over them with you quickly. Grit speaks to these short-term acute goals. What are the attributes that make up grit? People sometimes think of grit as its own attribute. Right? It's not. It's actually a combination of things. And Angela Duckworth wrote a great book that said as much, right? It's a bunch of things kind of baked and stewed together. Courage, perseverance, adaptability, resilience. Mental acuity, the attributes that speak to how our brain processes the world. Okay, these are kind of intertwined. How we take in information, how once we have that information, we compartmentalize it into what we need to focus on in the moment. How we switch between focus points, right? We don't and can't multitask. That's a myth. I think we've all heard that. Those of you who think you can do 2 things at once, you might say, well, I can drive my car and listen to a podcast, right? Well, it doesn't count if you've relegated one of those activities to your unconscious mind. You can do that because you don't have to think about driving. Guarantee you, however, if you're driving, listening to a podcast, and someone swerves in front of you, and you have to maneuver out of it, right? You're going to have to rewind that last 15 seconds of the podcast because your brain just switched. That's task switching. How effectively and efficiently are we able to do that? And then learnability, can we process, absorb that? Drive, whereas grit speaks to kind of short-term, acute kind of challenges, drive speaks to that long-term goals. How able are we to envision, set, and drive towards and achieve long-term goals? Those are the attributes that make up drive. Self-efficacy, discipline, open-mindedness, cunning, and yes, narcissism. We can talk about that one later if we want. And then leadership. What are the attributes that make great leadership? Leadership is not a position, okay? Being in charge and being a leader are not the same things. One's a noun and one's a verb. And we don't, in my opinion, in my experience, we don't get to call ourselves leaders. We don't get to self-designate. That's like calling yourself good-looking or funny. All right? You don't get to do that. Other people decide whether or not you are someone they want to follow. You are all in positions where you're in charge. Whether or not you are seen as a leader is based upon what other people's decision is, and is based on these behaviors, the start point. Those behaviors: empathy, selflessness, authenticity, decisiveness, accountability. How does this work in teams? First thing I need to do is I need to describe to you what teams actually are, because we always assume when we talk about high-performing teams, well, it's a championship-winning hockey team, it's a SEAL team, right? But a team defined is simply this. It's a group of 2 or more people working together towards a common goal or objective. That's it, okay? So yes, it can be a SEAL team. Yes, it could be a hockey team. A great high-performing team can be a great marriage. It can be a group of friends on a trip. Be a group of colleagues working on a project, okay? Anytime you have 2 or more people working together towards a common goal or objective, you have a team. We're all on teams, and we can all create high-performing teams, whether it's a team of 2 or 20 or 100. What does it look like? How does it metabolize in the world? That's secret number 3, dynamic subordination. Okay, I was in front of a group of executives shortly after retiring, and they asked me, they said, hey, Rich, can you draw for us what the task organization looks like for a high-performing team like a SEAL team, right? I had a whiteboard in front of me. But frankly, I was stumped, okay, because the options I had available to me at the moment didn't add up. I had the normal hierarchical pyramid, which we all know and hear here, and it's certainly very military. A lot of corporations look like this. You know, it starts at the top, goes down, I'm your leader, you work for me type thing. Okay, that's obviously not how a high-performing team runs. The flat model, which was kind of a mild rebellion to the pyramid. Hey, we're going to flatten everything, we're all together in this. No one outranks anybody else, we're all in this together. Kind of neat, it works kind of well when you have really small teams, but the problem is sometimes you get confused as to who's actually in charge. And because it's a flat line, a decision can be made on the right side of that line that can't be seen by the left, right? It gets siloed. That's not how a high-performing team operates. So that was out the window. Robert Greenleaf came up with his servant leadership model. He turned the pyramid upside down, said, hey, if you're the leader, you work for your people, right? It's actually a beautiful model, philosophical, right? If there's one we should lean on, it's probably that one. However, that still doesn't describe a high-performing team. Why? Because in a high-performing team, the burden is distributed. It's not all one person. So largely in frustration, I drew what looked like a blob or an amoeba. And I said, where do you think the leader sits in this one? And I got answers like front, back, middle. I said, all of you are correct. In dynamic subordinate situation, the leader is wherever the leader needs to be in the moment. The team with dynamic subordination understands that challenges, problems, and issues can come from any angle at any moment. And when they do, the person who is closest to the problem and the most capable immediately steps up and takes charge. And everybody follows. It's a dynamic swap between leader and follower. I also call it alpha swapping. If you think about the best teams, this is how it happens. Even random teams that operate pretty well. Think of the commercial airliner. None of us would disagree that the captain of that airplane is the one in charge. Okay? Everybody agrees to that. However, if on taxi out to takeoff, he gets a call from the maintenance guy, and the maintenance guy says, hey, you have an issue, you need to turn around. No captain worth their wings is going to ignore that call, right? That captain is going to immediately subordinate to that maintenance officer. Turn the plane around, park the plane at the gate, they have to deplane the plane. Well, the captain doesn't take charge of that either. The flight attendant steps up, takes lead. That's how it operates, that's how it works. What are the additional attributes? The fifth category required to do this. The ones I talk about in the book are these: integrity, conscientiousness, humility. Greg talked a lot about humility, and humor. I can't go into all of them. I will go into the power of the last one, okay? Humor. What we have to recognize about laughing is that laughing is an involuntary response, okay? Well, let me back this up. I'll start with a story. In SEAL training, specifically Hell Week, but most of SEAL training, they do what's called surf torture. Surf torture is an evolution where they line you up as students, they walk you out to the surf zone. This is Southern California, which those of you who've been out there know that the water out there is pretty darn cold, okay? But they line you up, and then you walk out to about knee high, and then you turn around and you lay back, okay? And the waves just crash over you and recede, crash over you and recede. You're in there for what seems like hours. It's the coldest thing I've ever done in my life. You get the most quitters during surf torture, usually done at night. The instructors will always, at some point, as they did with us, pull a van up, get out with a megaphone, and the guy will say, hey, I have hot chocolate, blankets, and donuts for anybody who quits right now. Kind of like a Survivor Challenge thing, right? He did this to us, I remember, and when he said that, the guy to my right immediately piped up. He yells, hey, do you have any chocolate glazed donuts? Because if you don't, I ain't quitting. And I burst out laughing, he burst out laughing. And I knew in that moment we'd be okay. I looked to my left, the guy to my left, he hasn't even cracked a smile. He's lost in his pain. And I said to myself, ooh, this guy's not gonna make it. Sure enough, within a minute, he was quitting. Laughter is an involuntary response, and when we laugh, first of all, we can't control it. And when it happens, we're flooded with three very powerful chemicals. Dopamine, which we all know, feel-good chemical, one of the most powerful neurotransmitters our body creates. Okay? Endorphins, which all of us athletes know, mask our physical pain, right? It's the human body's opiate. And then oxytocin, which is a hormone, but known as the love bonding hormone. It binds us together. It's exchanged in physical contact, gifts of kindness and generosity, and laughter. So when my buddy made that joke, what happened? Right? First, I get flooded with dopamine. Oh, okay. This is good. Keep doing this. That's what dopamine tells us. I get endorphins. This doesn't feel that bad. I got oxytocin. We're in this together. All right. Honor your class clowns. If you don't have class clowns on your team, find some. You need people who can make jokes and make us laugh when times are rough. It's why one of the top qualities in finding a mate is a sense of humor, because it's an unconscious signal that when times are rough, that person's going to lift us up biochemically, right? Which is what my wife of 20 years does for me. I remember coming back from one of my deployments. It was 2007, okay? Particularly successful deployments. I'm on top of the world. My wife is at home with our two boys. One's 3, one's 1. She's a little sick and tired of hearing how awesome her husband is, right? And it was a couple days in, and I'm working on my project or whatever. She's in the back dealing with the boys, and she says, "Hey, Rich, can you get the Q-tips for me?" I said, "I don't know where they are because I'm frustrated. I don't want to leave what I'm doing." She's like, "They're in the bathroom." Okay, fine. Now I'm kind of mad. I walk to the bathroom. Walk in the bathroom. They're not here. They're in the closet. Open the closet. "I'm telling you they're not here. They're on the shelf in the closet." I said, "I'm telling you they are not here." I hear her footsteps. It's like, okay, she's going to see that I'm right. From over my shoulder, grabs the Q-tips, shows them to me. She said, "They are right here." As she's walking away, she's like, "It's no wonder you guys haven't found bin Laden." So our best teammates could give us humor and humility, right? What's required for dynamic subordination? It's the fourth secret, trust, okay? Foundational element. All right, quick thing, because we hear about inspiration, we hear about trust, we say, okay, what's more important? They're both pretty important. However, here's what I'll ask you. If you had a team that was high on inspiration but low on trust, would that team survive? I'm getting a lot of no's. I agree. Let me ask you the reverse question. If you had a team that was a little bit low on inspiration, I'm right about that, low on inspiration, but high on trust, would that team survive? Low on inspiration, high on trust, would that team survive? Yeah. The answer is yes, okay? The way we need to think about this is pretty simple, all right? Inspiration is the wind, trust is the boat. It's okay, it's obviously great when we're sailing, everything's cool, we're going fast, the wind's in our face, all right? But sometimes we go into doldrums. Sometimes the wind dies down. Sometimes the storm rolls in, all right? I can tell you this from experience. Sometimes the military mission is decidedly uninspirational. The way we got through it, the way we survived, was trust. That's the boat. If you don't have the boat, you are sinking. That's why it's foundational. That's why it's important. We often think of trust as feeling. I feel like I trust this person. I feel like I trust this thing, all right? But a feeling is just a human emotion. That's all it is, all right? So we kind of thought about this and decided actually trust is more than just a feeling. It's a belief. A belief is a human emotion that's been rationalized or justified by that human being. Doesn't matter if it's right or wrong, just matters that it has, all right? It takes a decision. It takes a decision by us to trust, all right? Which tells us another thing pretty simple. You cannot make someone trust you. All you can do is behave in a way that allows people to make a decision to trust you. Another story about buds. Buds is 3 phases, all right? So first phase is Hell Week and all that silly stuff. Second phase, you're kind of learning some diving stuff. There's a lot of underwater stuff. Third phase is all land warfare stuff. So you're learning, all your weapons, some demolition. For the last 5 weeks of the third phase of training, you go out to an island just off the coast of San Diego called San Clemente Island, all right? It's an island that's about 10 miles long, about a mile wide at its widest point. And you go there to do all of your underwater demolition, your land demolition, your weapons training, all that loud stuff to not disturb the fine folks of San Diego County. Right? And when you go there as a student, the saying is, on the island, no one can hear you scream because the instructors are constantly screwing with you, because it is SEAL training after all. One of the things they do to you is they make you earn every meal, all right, through physical activity, right? So to earn breakfast, you had to go to the chow hall and climb up and down the 65-foot rope climb with all your gear, okay? Up, down, you're good, you get to go eat. Lunchtime, you had to do, there's equipment right outside there, of course. You had to do 50 push-ups, 50 dips, and I think 20 pull-ups, something like that. You did that, you got to go eat. For dinner, though, you had to do the hill run, okay? The hill run was something different. The hill, which was right next to the chow hall and the barracks, can only be described as long, tall, and steep, okay? It was about a 400-meter run up to the top where you stand on a starting line, the instructor would have a stopwatch, he'd say go, and you'd just be in your slick camouflage, you'd run up, touch this thing at the top, and come down. You had the time with which you had to do that up-down decreased every week, right? If you didn't make the time, you were punished. They didn't want to starve you at that point, so what they did is they made you get wet and sandy, and then you had to eat your meal outside, which by that point in SEAL training, you have no interest in being wet and sandy anymore. All right. They also used the hill run for punishments, okay? But the punishment version of the hill run was a little bit different. The punishment version was called a flight, okay? A flight was now you still stand at the base of that hill, but now you're wearing all your gear, okay? So you have all your ammunition, all that stuff. It's like 20, 30 pounds. Okay, and then they make you grab a moving pallet. We all know those wooden moving pallets. They have the wooden ones, which are like 30, 40 pounds. They also have the metal versions, which are 70, 80 pounds, right? We had the metal versions, only the best for SEAL trainees, okay? You throw a metal pallet on your back, and you stand at the line. You say, request permission to take off. And the instructor says, permission granted, and you have to sprint up this hill and come back. Now, you're not really sprinting anymore. You're just trudging, because you have like 120 pounds of stuff, okay? That's what it looks like for anybody who can't visualize it. I'll let you, because I get chills when I look at it. But the flight was used for punishments, okay? If you were lucky and you weren't a wise ass, you didn't have to do many flights. Anyway, it's the day before we're flying off the island to go home to San Diego and graduate SEAL training, okay? Day before we're flying out. We're done. We started with 160 students. We're down to 38 of us. We're cleaning out the barracks. We're coking and joking. We're feeling great. From outside the barracks, we hear one of the instructors say, Class 210, muster on the flight line. Oh, great. What's this all about? So we all got the flight line. This instructor gets up someone had built like a podium that looked like a control tower. He gets up on this thing. His name was Instructor Goodman. Ironically, he was not a good man. Goodman says, all right, what's the fastest anybody has done a hill run to this point right now? I'm going to say it was 2 minutes, whatever. All right. He's like, okay, all of you are going to do flights until someone beats that time. So just a quick reminder, hill run is slick. It's just your camouflage. Flight is with all that stuff you're seeing right there. So I'm not sure, we were all ticked off. I'm not sure what sound I made or face I made that cued Goodman into me. But Goodman looks at me and said, hey, Ensign Diviney, you have a problem with that? So I step out of line and say, yeah, I have a problem with that. And he's like, why do you have a problem with that? I said, because it's a stupid idea. Guys are going to get injured trying to run these flights. It's dumb to even try it. Now, the rest of my class at that point sounds a lot like you all. They're dead silent. Some of them are starting to step away from me a little bit. The words leave my mouth, and I'm like, oh my God, what did I just say? Goodman is silent for what seems like forever, but finally speaks up and says, all right, since Ensign Diviney has a problem with this, what we're going to do instead is we're going to run back to the auditorium, or run back to the barracks, go to the auditorium, and watch movies for the rest of the afternoon. And so, again, all of us are silent until someone is smart enough to start running before he changes his mind. We all start running back. I feel great. I get a bunch of high fives. All right? That's not the point of the story. I can't even remember what movies we watched. The point of the story comes 17 years later. Okay, 17 years later, I run into two guys from my buds class. I hadn't seen them in 17 years. I did most of my career on the East Coast. These guys were West Coast guys. All right? We're reminiscing. And at one point, one of the guys says, hey, sir, do you remember that time you stood up to Goodman on the flight line? And I say, yeah, of course, I remember that. I hadn't thought about it for a while, but I remember that. Both of them, at that moment say, "Sir, we would follow you anywhere, anytime. We trust you anywhere, anytime." So I began to think, why does that happen? How does that happen? How does that trust still exist after 17 years? Okay, it couldn't have been skills, really, because they didn't know what kind of SEAL I was. I could have been a horrible SEAL. I wasn't. I was a fine SEAL, just so you know. Why did that trust still exist? We did this work. I worked for a company, still do some work for them, called the Barry Wehmiller Leadership Institute, great company out of St. Louis. And we deconstructed trust, okay? Trust is 4 components. Let me go over them with you now. The first 2, competence, consistency, okay? Competence, I can do the thing. I trust you to do the thing, all right? Consistency, do the thing right over time. All right, those are the first 2 elements. Those 2 elements are pretty easy, and they're pretty visible. You can see that stuff, okay? The next 2 are a little bit more innate, a little harder to see. Next one is character. Character, as we know, and as Greg described, is a big word, okay? If I were to boil it down to one thing, maybe I'd say integrity, okay? So do the thing right over time, do the right thing. And then finally, compassion. Do the right thing for me because you care about me as a human being. These 4 elements are the elements of trust. Now, you can start a trusting relationship inside of any one of these elements. It's only when you have all 4, however, when you have the most powerful, long-lasting, enduring trust. Okay, let me give you an example. Some of us maybe decide after tonight, we're going to go out in town, we're going to have a few drinks, okay? We don't want to drive home, so we call a cab. Cab shows up, picks us up. We get in the cab. Within 1,000 meters or so, the cab runs into a telephone pole. Say, okay, that stinks. We get out of the cab, find our way home. A couple nights later, the same group of us are out having drinks. We decide we don't want to drive home. We call a cab. Cab rolls up. It's the same driver from the night before. Are we going to get back in the car with that driver? Probably not. Now, let's rewind that whole scenario. We go out, we have drinks, we need a ride home. We don't call a cab. We call our spouse, mother, father, brother, sister, best friend. That person shows up, picks us up. That person, within 1,000 meters, runs into a telephone pole. A few days later, we get back in the car with that person. Some people have said, no, I'm not going to, but most of us would. The reason why we would get back in the car with that other person is because with that other person, we had all 4 elements. We had things to lean back on, to fall back on. This is the power of all 4 elements, all right? And those last 2 are some of those more innate qualities, some of those attributes, those behaviors that allow us to decide to trust somebody. Let me show you how to do it. Beforehand, this is my buds class. We got back from the island. This is the day we were graduating. We took this picture, then changed into our summer whites and graduated. If you look at the bottom left, I'm the 3rd guy in. I was about 12. No. Great class. Here's how you do it. Again, you can start building a trust relationship with any one of these factors. The key is don't just settle on just one, because oftentimes in a business relationship, we settle on just the first 2. We need to work on all 4 elements, okay? Compassion. We've heard from our speakers how to start building compassion. Listen. Number 1 thing. Shut up and listen. It shows people that you care about them. I'm not talking about just listening like we usually listen. We usually listen like as someone's talking, I'm thinking about the next thing I want to say. Or as someone's talking, I'm thinking about what they're saying, how it relates to my life. No, I'm talking about like edge of your seat, like full-blown listening, where when things are popping in your mind, you're whiteboarding it out. That type of listening. Walk a mile in their shoes. Again, empathy. Heidi talked about empathy. All right? Really, really important. Sympathy, I know how you feel. Empathy, I feel how you feel. And like was described and emphasized, you don't have to agree with it. Just walk a mile in their shoes. You show someone you do that, you start building this belief that you care about them. Look after people's well-being, be an advocate, recognize and celebrate people. All right, character, be honest, keep your word. Behave in alignment with your values. It's really good to know your values, okay? Knowing your attributes will give you a clue to your values. Knowing your values will give you a clue to your attributes. In the book, I have a values discovery activity because it helps you figure out both. give credit where it's due, speak truth to power. Consistency, pretty easy. Be someone people can count on, show up stable performance over time. And then confidence. Skills are important. Doing the job right is important, okay? Because it does matter. It's one of the elements of trust, so it does matter. It's just not the only element. That's how you do it. Here's how you measure it. This is a chart that shows, on the left side, environments where trust does not exist, on the right side where trust does exist, okay? Fear of challenging organizational policy versus people feel free to speak truth to power. Okay? Any organization, by the way, or business that relies on safety, or safety is a big part, boy, that is a huge one. All right? I would never want my explosives guy to be like, when I ask them, hey, things good? Yeah, we're good, and not be telling me the truth. He needs to be able to tell me if it's a mistake or we're doing something wrong. Little or no risk-taking versus initiative is rewarded. All right? By the way, this is where innovation lives and dies. Okay? Innovation lives on the right, dies on the left. To innovate, you have to be able to create an environment where people are free to make mistakes, to fail early and fail often. That's what innovation is. So the idea is to look at this chart and and really ask yourself, hey, how are we showing up in our businesses and our teams? You don't have to strive for perfection, okay? But what are we doing? What could we do better? And what works? Let me show you one more chart that kind of talks a little bit more about the performance part, okay? On this chart, I can probably say that trust exists pretty much everywhere on this chart other than maybe the bottom left. Okay, you'll see care on the x-axis and proficiency on the y-axis. All right, there's a difference, though. Let me give you an example. My brother-in-law loves plumbing, okay? He reads all the books. He watches HGTV. He's not a plumber. He just loves plumbing. All right? If I have a major plumbing problem in my house, I'm probably not going to call my brother-in-law. Why? Because he sits on the bottom right of that chart. High care, low proficiency. I could actually call the master plumber. Show up, right away, spot on, do the job the first time, every time. He may gouge me on the prices, because that guy might sit on the top left. Low care, high proficiency. So what I'm telling you, that what I need in my life is a brother-in-law master plumber. Because that guy or gal sits on the top right. Right? This works phenomenally when you get all these relationships working, okay? When you're in charge of a SEAL troop, as the officer in charge, you're the only officer. The rest of the SEALs are enlisted, okay? But you have a senior enlisted guy, a troop chief, okay? And that guy is like, you joke, it's supposed to be like a married couple. That's how close you're supposed to be. I mean, you're just supposed to click. I was going to get a guy, I was coming back from one deployment, I was getting a new troop chief. My other troop chief was retiring. I was getting a guy named Harry. Harry had been a troop chief previously, and gotten in trouble, gotten relieved from that, and then recycled through ops, and then he was going to be given another chance, all right? And they said, hey, Rich, you're going to get Harry. I said, okay. Harry and I sat down for the first time in the team room across from each other. And Harry, like any SEAL, because all of us SEALs, whenever we screw up, we just want to tell the other SEAL like what we did wrong. He said, hey, I should probably tell you what happened. And I stopped and I said, Harry, I don't want to hear what happened. I don't care what happened. All I care about you and I, our relationship in this troop. That's all I care about. Let's talk about that. We proceeded to talk about that for a good 3 hours. He told me later, he said, Rich, you were the first guy who ever told me not to tell you what happened. He said, I trusted you immediately. Because for us, it was about the team. It wasn't about what happened in the past. And we created a troop that was top right the whole way through. It was, after that troop, Harry retired. I went to training. And Harry took a job doing some contracting work. And it was, he was in Afghanistan again. It was October 2015. We got word Harry had stepped on a landmine. Didn't know he was going to survive. Finally, we heard he was going to survive. All right, but he was a double amputee. It was about Thanksgiving. I'm sitting in my living room. I get a text from Harry. He's like, you're around. So I immediately call him and say, Harry, how's it going? I want to, how are you? What can I do to help you? All that stuff. He said, Rich, I wanted to call you. I want to tell you when this happened, I thought about my family, of course, but I also thought about you. I want to make sure that you knew I was going to be okay. It'll be a rough road, but I'll be okay. That's how powerful that is. What I ask you all to do is look at this chart and ask yourselves these 3 questions, okay? If you had to place yourself on this chart in terms of how your team sees you, where would you place yourself in terms of how your team sees you on this chart? Okay, you can kind of imagine maybe a T, all right? Next question would be, if you had to place yourself on this chart, how your leader sees you. Where would you place yourself on this chart in terms of how your leader sees you? That could be an L, okay? And then finally, place yourself on the chart in terms of how your family and or friends sees you. Okay, that can be an F. Now, the question would be, are those positions in the same place? And I would imagine if you actually did the diligence on this, they're not. Okay, they're not in the same place. There's 2 caveats to this exercise. Caveat number 1 is that we live in a dynamic world and our seasons change. Okay? Just positionally where we are in the moment, we might be building trust in the moment. Greg taking over the team day 1 was probably not top right. He had to build that, just like anybody does. So season matters. The other important caveat is, and this is a harder one to swallow, we are not the best person to decide where we fall on that chart. We need to ask those in our span of care, ask our leaders, ask our family and friends. I was, both my boys, my family's here, both my boys are here. My eldest son Connor was 2. He was born in 2005, so the war was in full-fledged. He started having trouble with me leaving even at the age of 2. It was tough. So it was really hard because I had to keep leaving. And we got him help and tried to do that. I was trying to, whenever I was home, to be top right. And so at one point, he was about 8 years old. He was in the Cub Scouts. I said, you know what? Let's arrange it. I arranged his whole entire Cub Scout troop to come to a SEAL team and get a tour. And see all the stuff, look at all the gear. And it was awesome. And a couple weekends later, we were at a friend's house having a barbecue. Our friend hadn't seen us for a while. He's talking to Connor and I, and we're telling him about this Cub Scout thing. And I remember my friend looks at Connor and says, "Man, Connor, it must be so awesome having a dad who's a Navy SEAL." Connor looks him directly in the eye and says, "I wish my dad were a garbage man." For him, top right was being home. Right? How does a child spell love? T-I-M-E. All right, we have to understand where we're falling on this chart based on how those people in our lives see us. And hopefully we've developed an environment to get the right, honest feedback. That's Harry. All right, it was later in the spring, actually, spring 16. He finally got back to Virginia Beach. We finally got to meet for sushi. I meet up with him. We're walking to the sushi place. I'm looking at him. I was like, "Yep, there's something different about Harry." Obviously not his legs, right? But there's something different. And we go in. We visit for a good 3 hours. We're visiting, reminiscing, all that stuff. And we're walking out. And as we're walking out, it hits me. And I stop. I stop Harry. I say, "Harry." He's like, "What?" He's like, "Are you taller?" And he looks at me dead in the eye and says, and I quote, "Fuck yeah, I'm taller." I said, "I always wanted to be 6 feet tall. They gave me 6-foot tall legs." So Harry's now taller than I am, so that's good. Harry and I see each other all the time. I'm going to see him when I get back from here. We will be best friends for life. Neither of us are just SEALs anymore. Neither of us do any SEAL stuff anymore. It has nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with the skills. Okay. Secret 5. If you make all of this work, okay, you create what I call masters of uncertainty. This is, in fact, what SEALs are, okay? SEALs, I always used to say, SEALs are masters of uncertainty. That's what we do. That's what we are, okay? We operate in environments that are not predictable. This is the difference between complex and complicated environments. A complicated environment is like an F1 race car, okay? Intricate, yes, thousands of parts. but highly predictable. Okay? The people who make those and drive those know exactly what that car is going to do in exactly every condition down to the decimal point. Okay? That is a complicated environment. A complex environment is like a human body. This is, I think, a map of a terror network, but it's a dynamic environment that adapts, that changes, that you can't predict. That's how we operate. And guess what our lives are? They're complex. How many of us predicted COVID, right? Everything about our lives is complex, pretty much, in terms of what we can or cannot predict. You create a team that can operate in complexity. In the military, you call it VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous environments, the VUCA environment, right? How do you do this? You build the team and you start doing things that are different, that are hard. In the military, I have a saying, you train for certainty, you educate for uncertainty. Training is skills, and you need to do that. You need to train skills. You need to take the shot several hundred times so you know how to do it. Education is about experience, filling your synapses with different optics, perspectives, different environments, different people. Another powerful, there's so many reasons for diversity. The more perspectives we can fill ourselves and our teams with, the more capable we are to deal with uncertainty. Okay. We patrolled out of the base. Just a click and a half, so it's a pretty short walk. And we don't say anything. As soon as we're out, it's like a kind of a silent flock of birds. We just move. That's the power of the team, right? In fact, talking is too slow. We know what we can. You can tell. I can tell each guy just by their silhouette. That's how well we know each other. We move out. We start getting close to the compound. It was a compound of about 3 different buildings, right? I push my snipers out first. They climb the buildings, the high points to cover us, security. Give the execute call. Teams start taking down the buildings. Take down the first building. A couple women and children. Make sure they're okay. Secure that. Second building, nothing in there. Third building, they run in there. Sitting in front of them in a chair is the guy we're looking for with an AK-47 over his shoulder. In any environment in war, okay, that situation is permission to shoot. Except my guys are a high-performing team. They think fast and they adapt. What they recognized when they ran into that room in a split second was the guy was dead asleep. So they didn't shoot. They walk up to him, they shake him on the shoulder, and he wakes up looking at 4 steely-eyed Navy SEALs. And the look on his face, priceless. Right? We recaptured him, put him back in the compound. He never escaped again, which is good. Right? Not a shot fired, not a drop of blood spilled. You won't hear about that mission in any books, any movies. It's not sexy enough. Okay? None of us fired our guns, right? That's what a successful mission looks like. That's what most SEAL missions look like, right? It's when we do it and people never knew we were there. And no one gets hurt, no one gets killed. That's how success looks for most of us. Another bust in the mythology. Right? That whole mission, what did we do? Okay? We performed optimally, right? We never expended too much energy as we moved down that pathway of planning, okay? We relied on our attributes, not just skills, okay? All of our adaptability, our courage, our perseverance, every one we relied on. We dynamically subordinated, okay? People stepped up when they needed to step up and took lead when they needed to take lead, and they receded when they needed to recede and followed when they needed to follow. We trusted each other implicitly, and we were absolute masters of uncertainty. Those 5 things can be done with any team, whether you're a team of SEALs, hockey players, business people, a great marriage. All right? It's that interplay. I talk about it in the book, right? Feel free. We're now getting more technologically advanced. You can scan that code. You can go to the website. On the website, we've created an assessment tool. It's free. Yeah, you can see where you stand on a bunch of the attributes, on the grit ones, the mental acuity ones, the drive ones. All right? Now, when you take that assessment, I would definitely recommend, if you can, read the book first. Not a requirement. Okay? But when you take the assessment, recognize that the assessment, when we built it, is a comparison. We basically got data from about 1,000 different people Okay, so that readout you get, the number you get for your attribute has to be, you have to reflect on it. Okay, first you have to take the assessment, you have to reflect on yourself, answer the questions honestly, but then say, hey, when I get that number, when it says I'm a 3 on adaptability, let me ask myself, let me index that against some challenge, uncertainty, and stress that I've experienced. Am I in fact 3 on adaptability? Is adaptability hard for me? Right? That's what you have to ask yourself. And start to understand what your engine looks like. Once you understand your engine, you can encourage your teammates to understand their engines. Right? Once you know the engines of your teammates, you are on your way to being a high-performing team. And you can do anything. Thank you very much.
So I have the mic for any questions. Rich, I'll start off with a question to you. In your book, you talk about in quite detail what you went through as it relates to cortisol and endorphins and adrenaline, and you talk about flight and fight. And all of us are dealt with issues or times when we feel like either fighting or flighting. And what you talk about in great detail is that the best SEALs that you worked with were somehow able to suspend themselves between flight or fight to be able to pause before taking action. And I think all of us are dealt with these issues in the corporate world of you either want to fight someone on something or you want to take a deep breath and, if you will, flight from it. Any tricks on how people can play in that space? And I've got the mic for the next question.
Yeah, so fight and flight comes from our courage response. Courage cannot exist in the absence of fear. So when we talk about courage, it means our ability to step into our fear. Stepping into our fear means our ability to step into the fight response, okay? Fear starts to develop in our systems when two things are present. Anxiety plus uncertainty, okay? You can have one without the other, and you're not necessarily fearful, okay? You can be anxious without being uncertain, okay? That's like, I got to give a presentation next week. I know the material, I know the crowd, but I'm just a little anxious. I know what's going to happen, but I'm anxious but not uncertain, okay? Not much fear. You can be uncertain without being anxious. Well, that's every kid on Christmas Eve, right? Not much fear there. Once you start combining the two, that amygdala starts to ramp up, okay, the amygdala response, and we start to feel this fight or flight, okay? There's really only two responses. Freeze, in fact, neurologically, is simply an oscillation. It's a decision point between the two, right? When we decide to step into our fear, fight, okay, we actually get a dopamine reward system for that. Our body gives us a burst of dopamine, designed by nature to get us to explore, to get us out of the cave, to find food, to find shelter. Okay, so we have to understand what fear is and how we get rewarded by stepping into it. That said, the pause is a good thing to do because sometimes the right decision is to flee, okay? If you meet a bear up there, don't fight, okay? Flee, all right? That's the right decision. So to buy down either one of those, uncertainty, anxiety, you can do a couple things. Anxiety is internally focused. It's a physiological response. Right, which means we can use our physiology to become less anxious. Breathing, okay? Open gaze is a good one. Science has found that when you open gaze rather than a deep focus, you know, kind of this, you're seeing your peripheries, your body starts to come down off of anxiety, okay? It brings your frontal lobe back more online so you can actually make a better decision, okay? And once you are able to make a better decision, you can start to deal with uncertainty a little bit, right? Uncertainty is external, okay? So we have to get through uncertainty, to start buying down uncertainty, we have to start asking ourselves some pretty specific questions. In other words, what about this environment do I understand? And make that list, however short, okay? Okay, from that list, what can I control in this moment? And move to that. That's how SEALs and super performers step through fear. We break it down, we manage our response, we manage our physiology, we break it down, we pick what we can control, we move to that. And then once we do that, we actually get another dopamine response. Our body's really kind to us, which means we can ask the question again. Now what can I control? Move to that. Now what can I control? Move to that. All right? This is any of us, every one of us has a story of moving through deep challenge, uncertainty, and stress. Probably a lot of us during COVID, right, where we've done this, we just didn't know we were doing it. But we can actually hack into this and do this more deliberately.
Got one question, and then we've got the panel, and we're short on time, so let's go with one question here, and then there will be other questions for Rich.
Rich, my question is...
A little bit closer, I think it's on.
My question really dovetails nicely with that question and your answer. When you listed the attributes right in the beginning, grit was one of them. And I noticed courage was the first
Yeah.
under grit.
Yep.
So I'm sure it's on all of our minds, but that courage, it can dovetail with fear, but one's willingness to put your life at risk
Yeah.
is what I really go to with that courage. How do you assess that in the training? And then how does that play out over your long career and everything that you did, and then
Yeah.
all the people that served under you?
It's a great question, and we actually joke amongst each other. We kind of joke that, hey, if we knew we were going on a mission and kind of like knew we were going to die, would we go? It's like, probably not really. I mean, we try to plan in a way that allows us to prepare, right? We know there's risks, but the way we operate through those risks are understanding that we need to prepare our skills. We need to be well trained. I need to know how to shoot, move, and communicate. Okay, so I hyper train those, and then we lean on our attributes. I know that when things go sideways, we'll figure it out. This, by the way, is what I believe true confidence is. I believe true confidence is the ability to understand about oneself, hey, no matter what happens, no matter where the environment goes, whatever direction it takes, I'll figure it out. You know, it's funny, my wife and I, we live in Virginia Beach. We, on our road, right across the street is a SEAL. Right down the road to our right hand is a SEAL, one of my old instructors, and to the left hand was a SEAL. He actually just moved away, but we had 4 SEALs in the neighborhood. And my wife, I remember she said, I'm so glad these guys are here, because if you're away, I know I can go to them if something happens, because they'll act exactly like you act. And I said, what do you mean by that? She said, as soon as I give them a problem, they'll just calm down and they'll start figuring it out. That's what we do. We just understand, hey, when we'll prepare ourselves up to a point, and then we'll just move through the situation. So I think we don't focus on necessarily the worst case scenario. To do so is disempowering. Because really, to project that stuff, it's not helping the situation. Focus on preparing what we can prepare, and then understanding that as the environment moves forward, we'll manage our anxiety, and we'll ask the right questions. So I think that's the best way to answer that.
Rich, we're going to have the panel come up, so we're going to hear more from Rich in a moment. But I would just say, from all of us, not only thank you for your presentation today, but thank you for your service to our country.
Oh, thank you. I will just add that I want to thank my family for their service, because they're the ones they serve just as much. So Kristen, Connor, and Josh. So.